They thought a grieving widow was an easy target, a broken thing, a shadow to be swept aside with the rest of the empty space their son's death had left behind. They took my husband's fortune, the legacy he built with his own hands and brilliant mind for us, for our future. They threw me out into the rain as if I were garbage. My father-in-law told me I was entitled to nothing. My mother-in-law, with an evil smile as sharp as a shard of glass, said I was just the help he'd married. They stood there, surrounded by the opulence my husband had created. They thought they had one. They had no idea they were making their worst enemy. Because a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. This is not a story of grief. This is the story of my revenge. My name is Isabella Sterling. For 5 glorious, sun-drenched years, I was married to Nathaniel Sterling, and being his wife meant living inside a dream he crafted just for us. Nathaniel wasn't just wealthy. He was a titan, a modern-day king. A self-made billionaire who built his tech empire, Ethereus, from a college dorm room project into a global phenomenon that changed how the world connected. But to me he was just Nate. The man who loved cheap Chinese takeout eaten straight from the cardboard containers, who snored softly in his sleep, a sound I learned to love like a lullaby, and who looked at me as if I'd hung the moon and stars simply by walking into a room. We met at a charity auction for the New York Museum of Modern Art. I was the junior curator, flustered, sleep-deprived, and desperately trying to keep the event on schedule while managing a dozen inflated egos. He was the guest of honor, bored and detached, a statue in a Brioni suit, until I, trying to direct a spotlight, tripped over a poorly placed speaker wire and went sprawling across the polished floor. The silence was mortifying, but then he was there. Instead of laughing or looking away, he was on one knee, helping me up, his hand warm and steady around mine. He smelled of sandalwood and crisp air. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur meant only for me. This is the most interesting thing that's happened all night. Later, he bid an obscene amount of money on a painting I'd casually admired to a colleague, a vibrant abstract piece, just to have an excuse to talk to me. "It reminds me of you," he'd said when he presented it to me on our first date. Full of unexpected color and fire. Our life was a fairy tale. Not because of the money, though the private jets, the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the spontaneous summers on the French Riviera were a breathtaking backdrop, but because of the profound, unwavering love that filled those spaces. Nathaniel was my sanctuary. He was the solid ground beneath my feet after a childhood spent on shaky, uncertain soil. I was an orphan, you see, passed between reluctant relatives who saw me as a burden. He was my first and only true family. He made me feel chosen. His family, the Sterlings, were a different story. Alastair Sterling, his father, was a stern, perpetually disappointed man who had once owned a moderately successful hardware store and viewed Nate's billion-dollar empire not as an achievement, but as a fluke, a betrayal of his own modest, honest work. Eleanor Sterling, his mother, was a master of backhanded compliments and social climbing, her affection as cold and polished as the diamond she loved to wear. And then there was Julian, Nate's younger brother. A leech wrapped in an Armani suit, whose greatest ambition was to live off his brother's success, forever holding the title of Vice President of Special Projects, a role that involved long lunches and signing off on expense reports for his own indulgences. I tried with them. God, I tried. For Nathaniel. I remembered birthdays with meticulously chosen gifts, arranged family dinners at the most exclusive restaurants, listened to Eleanor's endless critiques of my bohemian taste and my unfortunate lack of lineage. I tolerated Julian's lazy, entitled jokes at my expense, his constant hints that I'd landed the lottery ticket. For Nathaniel. Because he, in his infinite goodness, still saw the ghost of good in them. "They're difficult, my love," he'd say, pulling me into his arms after a particularly tense Sunday brunch, kissing my forehead. "But they're family. Blood is a complicated chain." The crack in our perfect world appeared on a Tuesday. "A headache," he'd said. "Just a tension headache from staring at screens too long." Then came the dizziness, a sudden terrifying stumble in the penthouse foyer. Within a week, the team of specialist doctors gave us the word that shatters universes. Glioblastoma. an aggressive, inoperable brain tumor, nestled in a place too delicate to touch. The 5 years of our marriage were compressed into 5 brutal, soul-grinding months of hospitals that smelled of antiseptic and despair, of experimental treatments that offered slivers of hope before dashing them, and a slow, heartbreaking erosion of the man I loved. The brilliant mind that could code a new world began to falter, losing words, losing memories. The strong hands that held mine grew weak and trembled. I watched the Titan become a patient, the king become a subject to his own failing body. He died on a stormy October night, the rain lashing against the windows of our bedroom, which had become his sick room. His last breath was a soft sigh against my cheek, a final whisper of the man who had been my everything. The world didn't just go silent. It became a void. The only thing I felt was the crushing physical weight of a future without him. The funeral was a massive society event. Politicians, CEOs, celebrities, all come to pay homage to the legend of Nathaniel Sterling. I was a ghost in a black Alexander McQueen dress, numb to the stream of empty condolences, anchored only by the fierce, solid presence of my best friend, Sarah, who held my hand so tightly I thought the bones might fuse together. The Sterling family was there, of course, playing their parts to perfection. Alistair, stoic and grim, accepting handshakes like a deposed monarch. Eleanor, weeping theatrically into a lace handkerchief, supported by a rotating cast of sycophants. Julian, already looking distracted, checking his phone, a glimpse of the vulture he was beneath the mourning suit. A week after we laid Nathaniel to rest, when the casseroles had stopped arriving and the world expected me to begin my quiet, wealthy widowhood, I was summoned to the Sterling family lawyer's office. Mr. Davies, a man with the demeanor of a granite tombstone, sat behind a vast mahogany desk that seemed designed to intimidate. Alistair, Eleanor, and Julian were already there, seated in a plush leather row like a tribunal awaiting the accused. There was a single lonely chair for me, positioned to face them. "Isabella," Mr. Davies began, adjusting his glasses, the light glinting off the lenses and hiding his eyes. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Nathaniel James Sterling." I nodded, my throat too tight with a fresh wave of grief to speak. I expected this to be a mere formality. Nate and I had sat at this very table, it felt like a lifetime ago, and signed our wills, simple and clear documents. Everything to each other. No trusts, no complexities. Just us. Mr. Davies read the legal preamble, his voice a dry, emotionless monotone. Then he got to the heart of it, and the world began to tilt on its axis. "I, Nathaniel James Sterling, being of sound mind and body." He paused, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something uncomfortable on his face. "Bequeath the entirety of my estate, including all shares, controlling interests and intellectual property of Etherius Incorporated, all real estate holdings, financial assets and personal effects, to be placed in the Nathaniel Sterling Family Trust." I blinked, sure I had misheard. The Nathaniel Sterling Family Trust? Nate and I had never, ever discussed a trust. It was a phrase I associated with old money dynasties, with controlling heirs from beyond the grave. Our philosophy had always been about trust in each other, in the present. A cold dread, sharp as a shard of ice, began to creep up my spine. "The trust," Mr. Davies continued, steadfastly not meeting my eyes, "shall be managed and its distributions determined by its appointed trustees, my father, Alistair Sterling, my mother, Eleanor Sterling, and my brother, Julian Sterling." I felt the air leave my lungs in a whoosh. "Managed." I whispered, the word scraping my throat. "What does that mean?" "For me." My eyes darted from Davies's stony face to the triumphant, barely concealed smiles of my in-laws. Alistair Sterling leaned forward, his knuckles white as he clasped his hands on the desk. His eyes, so like Nate's in shape and color, held none of his son's warmth, only a glacial satisfaction. "It means, Isabella, that the estate is protected, consolidated, for the long-term security of the family." "But I am his family," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and rising panic. "I'm his wife. Our wills, we left everything to each other." "You witnessed it, Mr. Davies." "That was a previous will, Isabella," Mr. Davies said, his tone soft but firm, almost apologetic, yet doing nothing to stop the atrocity. This document was signed and notarized approximately 3 months ago. 3 months ago. The calculation was a knife to the gut. Right after his diagnosis, when the high-dose steroids and pain medications made him foggy, vulnerable, and suggestible. When his family had descended, a constant, suffocating presence at his bedside, whispering in his ear during the few lucid moments he had. This can't be right, I insisted, panic rising like a toxic tide inside me. He would never do this. He would never leave me with nothing. He loved me. He hasn't left you with nothing, Eleanor chimed in, her voice syrupy with a false, cloying sympathy that made my skin crawl. The trust provides a stipend for your continued welfare, a monthly allowance of $5,000. It's more than generous, dear, given you came into this marriage with nothing but a rather impractical art history degree. $5,000 a month to the woman who had been half of a billionaire partnership. It wasn't just an insult. It was a deliberate, calculated humiliation. A way to put me in my place, to remind me I was and always would be an outsider. And the penthouse? I asked, my voice a hollow echo. Our home? The home Nathaniel built for us. This time Julian couldn't hide his smirk. It was a quick, ugly twitch of his lips. The penthouse is a trust asset. We'll be putting it on the market. The proceeds will be reinvested to ensure the trust's growth. You have 30 days to vacate. The doorman will have a list of approved movers. The room spun, the expensive artwork on the walls blurring into a nauseating swirl of color. This was their plan all along. They hadn't just seen an opportunity, they had orchestrated it. They had preyed on a dying man, manipulated him in his weakest state, and stolen everything he had worked for. They weren't just taking his money. They were systematically erasing me from his life, from our shared history, reducing our love story to a line item in a trust fund they controlled. You monsters, I choked out, tears of rage and betrayal finally streaming down my face. He loved me. That was our life. You can't do this. Alistair's face hardened into a mask of pure contempt. It is already done, Isabella. This is what Nathaniel wanted. He realized in the end where his true responsibilities lay. With his blood. Not with some opportunistic gold digger he picked up along the way. The word gold digger was a physical blow. I staggered to my feet, my legs shaking so violently I had to grip the chair for support. I loved him. You know I did. He was my whole world. Eleanor gave a delicate, dismissive wave of her hand, the large diamond on her finger catching the light. Love is a luxury, dear. One you can no longer afford. Now, if you'll excuse us, the trustees have important business to discuss. I was ushered out of the office by a silent, grim-faced assistant, my world in ashes. The betrayal was so complete, so vicious it felt like a new kind of death. I stumbled out onto the rain-slicked street, the cold water mingling with the hot tears on my face, and I felt something break inside me, something fundamental. The next month was a blur of pain and logistical nightmares. I moved into a small, sterile rented apartment with Sarah, my spirit seemingly broken beyond repair. The $5,000 allowance arrived via direct deposit, a digital slap in the face each month. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. It felt dirty, tainted with their venom. I was drowning in a bottomless ocean of grief, but a new darker emotion was beginning to crystallize in the deep, cold darkness beneath the sorrow. A cold, hard, flawless diamond of rage. The spark that ignited everything came from a gossip magazine 2 months after my eviction. Sarah, trying to shock me out of my stupor, had brought over a stack of trashy tabloids and a pint of Ben & Jerry's. And there they were, splashed across the glossy page. The Sterling family. Sterling dynasty thrives, the headline screamed. They were at a gala, glasses of champagne in hand, smiling. Julian was quoted announcing his new role as acting CEO of Aetherius. Eleanor was showing off a new monstrously large emerald necklace. A tribute to my son's memory, she told the reporter. Alistair was pontificating about preserving his son's legacy from those who would see it diluted. My husband's legacy. The company he built with his sweat and genius, now in the hands of his feckless brother. The life he built for us, now their personal piggy bank to fund their gaudy jewels and hollow titles. I stared at their smug, triumphant faces, and the last thread of my broken heart snapped. The all-consuming grief didn't vanish, but it was forged in that moment into a new, unbreakable purpose. It was no longer a feeling, it was a mission. Revenge. Not a messy, emotional revenge. Not a screaming match or a slap in the face. I would be colder, smarter, more patient than they could ever imagine. I would study them, learn every weakness, every secret sin, and I would use their own greed as the weapon to destroy them. I would take everything from them just as they had from me. I would render them homeless, penniless, and utterly publicly destroyed. That night, I went to the small fireproof safe I'd managed to move from the penthouse. Inside, along with my grandmother's pearls and the simple platinum wedding band Nate had worn, was a plain, unmarked black USB drive. Nathaniel had given it to me about a year before he got sick. We were in his study, a fire crackling in the hearth, and he was uncharacteristically serious. "Isabella," he'd said, pressing the cool metal drive into my palm and closing my fingers around it. "This is a ghost key. A failsafe. It has backup administrative access to everything. Offshore vaults, encrypted diaries, private server logs, mirror archives of every financial transaction Aetherius has ever made. My family, they see $, not a legacy. They see a kingdom to plunder. If anything ever happens to me, you look here first. You are my only true legacy. You are the only one I trust." At the time, I'd kissed him and told him he was being paranoid, that his family was difficult but not monstrous. I'd tucked the drive away and forgotten about it, lost in the bliss of our life. Now I understood. He had known. He had seen the shark-like glint in their eyes long before I did, and he had given me the harpoon. With trembling hands, I plugged the drive into my laptop. It unlocked a digital labyrinth. There were files upon files, folders within encrypted folders. Financial records I was never supposed to see. Secret corporate documents and board meeting minutes. And most intriguingly, a file simply titled NJSN Personal Inc., Nathaniel's personal digital journal. It took me weeks, fueled by black coffee and white-hot fury, to decipher it all, to learn the language of his encryption, to follow the complex trails he had left. I became a nocturnal creature, my face lit only by the blue glow of the screen, my fingers flying across the keyboard. And what I found was the detailed, undeniable blueprint for their annihilation. I discovered that Alistair Sterling hadn't just been a disapproving father. He had been a thief. For years, he had been siphoning money from Aetherius, using his son's generosity and a seat on the board to fund his own string of failed business ventures, hiding the massive losses through a Byzantine network of shell companies. I found evidence of Julian's rampant, almost laughably brazen embezzlement, dozens of fake invoices for consultants and vendor services that all led back to shell companies he controlled, their only purpose to funnel money into his accounts. He was using company funds to pay for his mistress's apartments, his 7-figure gambling debts in Macau, his growing collection of vintage Italian sports cars. And Eleanor, dear, sweet, socially obsessed Eleanor. Her sins were more subtle but just as potent. I found records of her secret offshore account in the Cayman Islands, where she had stashed millions to avoid paying taxes, and a series of vicious, libelous emails she'd sent to ruin the reputation of a social rival who had dared to snub her at a fundraiser. They were all criminals. They had been stealing from Nathaniel, betraying him, while he was alive and building the empire they now pretended to cherish. And they had the breathtaking audacity to call me a gold digger. But the most powerful weapon, the one that made my blood sing with a righteous fire, wasn't just evidence of their crimes. It was the truth about the will. Buried deep in Nathaniel's journal entries from the time of his diagnosis, I found his raw, unfiltered pain and fury. An entry dated October 12th seared itself into my soul. "The headaches are a white-hot drill behind my eyes. The steroids make me feel like a stranger in my own skin. Dad and Mom will not leave me alone. They circle like vultures, talking about protecting the family fortune from outsiders. They mean Isabella. My beautiful, loyal Isabella. They're threatening to drag her through the courts, to publicly smear her name, to fabricate stories of infidelity and instability if I don't sign their new will and establish this damn trust. They say they have photos, lies they've paid people to corroborate. I can't put her through that. Not while I'm gone and unable to defend her. I have to protect her from them. Davies says this trust is the only way to make them back off, to make them leave her alone. God forgive me. This feels like a betrayal of everything we built. I'll find another way to make it right for her. I have to. He didn't change the will because he wanted to. He changed it under duress, under the threat of destroying my life after he was gone. They had blackmailed their dying son. The will was not just invalid. It was a product of criminal coercion. It was their masterpiece of manipulation. I had them all. But simply exposing them to the authorities wasn't enough. That would be a swift execution. I needed them to feel it. I needed to orchestrate their fall so perfectly, so inexorably, that they would watch their entire world crumble, piece by cherished piece, knowing with absolute certainty that I was the architect. My revenge would be a 3-act play of ruin. First, I would strangle them financially and professionally. Second, I would destroy them socially and publicly. Finally, I would shatter them personally and completely. To do this, I needed a powerful ally, someone with insider knowledge and a deep-seated loyalty to Nathaniel. I went to Benjamin Croft, Nate's former right-hand man and the ousted CFO of Etherius. The Sterling family had fired him a week after taking over, calling him disloyal for questioning Julian's extravagant expenses. He was living in a state of furious inertia, and he was more than happy to help me wage war. With Ben's financial expertise and my trove of digital evidence, we began phase 1, the financial strangulation. We started with Julian, the weakest link. Using the meticulous evidence of his embezzlement, Ben, through an anonymous encrypted channel, tipped off a notoriously ruthless financial journalist at the Wall Street Journal who had a known hatred for corporate fraud. A week later, a devastating front-page expose was published, Etherius Heir Apparent $1 million Company Fraud. The article was a masterpiece of forensic journalism, listing fake companies, invoice numbers, and bank transfers all laid bare. The SEC launched an immediate investigation. Julian was suspended from his acting CEO role, and his access to company accounts was frozen. I sat in my small apartment sipping tea and watched him give a tearful, unconvincing press conference on CNBC. His face pale and sweating, his world already beginning to implode. Next was Alastair. We anonymously leaked his convoluted financial records, showing the siphoning from Etherius directly to his creditors and the anxious investors in his private ventures. They saw the mismanagement, the lies, the funneling of funds. The reaction was swift and brutal. Lawsuits piled up at his door like autumn leaves. His personal credit was annihilated overnight. The banks, seeing the massive liability and the SEC investigation into his son, called in his loans. The man who prized control and patriarchal authority above all else was suddenly powerless, drowning in a sea of legal paper and cascading debt. Finally, Eleanor. Her downfall was to be a social one. We sent a carefully curated package, containing copies of her most venomous private emails and the records of her secret offshore account, to the heads of every charitable board and social club she presided over, as well as to the IRS. The emails, revealing her cruel gossip and scheming to destroy a rival, made her a social pariah. The tax records made her a liability. She was quietly, swiftly removed from the Metropolitan Museum Board and the exclusive Garden Society. Her coveted invitations dried up. The phone that used to ring constantly with party planners and sycophants fell into a silence that I knew, for a woman like her, was more terrifying than any lawsuit. Within 3 months, the mighty Sterling family was on the ropes, publicly shamed and financially bleeding. The monthly stipends stopped coming. I didn't care. I was living off my own small savings and the fierce, sustaining fire of my hatred. But this was just the beginning. They still had the trust. They still had the illusion of control and ownership. It was time to take it all away, to rip the very ground from under their feet. I hired the most feared, pitiless litigation lawyer in the country, a woman named Miranda Graves. Her nickname in legal circles was the Widowmaker, for her specialize in dismantling the estates of wealthy, deceased men. She was a hawk in a Prada suit with eyes that missed nothing. I provided her with Nathaniel's journal, the overwhelming evidence of coercion, and the full sordid record of the Sterling family's crimes. Miranda filed a devastating multi-count lawsuit on my behalf. It wasn't a simple challenge to the will. It was a legal blitzkrieg. We sued to have the will invalidated due to undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. We sued Alastair, Julian, and Eleanor individually for fraud, embezzlement, coercion, and breach of fiduciary duty. We sued the Sterling family trust itself for gross mismanagement and misappropriation of assets. The lawsuit was the lead story on every financial news channel for a week. The Sterling name, once synonymous with innovation and success, was now mud, associated with greed and criminality. The legal discovery process was a bloodbath. Miranda was relentless, a master of legal jujitsu. She forced them to open every book, reveal every transaction, explain every suspicious payment under oath. Their carefully constructed lies unraveled in public court documents for the world to see. I would sit in the gallery, dressed in a simple, elegant black suit, my back straight, and watch them squirm under the harsh courtroom lights. They wouldn't look at me. They couldn't. I was their ghost, their judge, their executioner. The pressure was too much for their fragile alliance. Julian, now facing not just civil liability but criminal charges from the SEC that promised prison time, broke first. In a desperate, pathetic bid for a plea deal, he agreed to turn state's evidence and testify against his parents. He provided a sworn affidavit that detailed the entire sordid conspiracy, how they had pressured a medicated and mentally compromised Nathaniel, how they had threatened to destroy my reputation, how Alastair had dictated the terms of the new will to Mr. Davies. It was the killing blow. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for having no patience for wealthy predators, ruled in our favor with scathing language. The will was thrown out as a product of egregious fraud and coercion. The previous will, the simple document leaving everything to me, was reinstated. With a single definitive strike of the gavel, the entire Sterling empire, Aetherius, the global headquarters, the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the investment portfolio, every single asset was mine. But I wasn't done. Justice had been served, but my revenge was not yet complete. I immediately exercised my power as the sole legal owner of Aetherius. I issued a press release and walked into the company headquarters for the first time in over a year. I fired the entire Sterling family from their fabricated, do-nothing positions. I had Ben Croft reinstated as CEO with a massive bonus and a mandate to cleanse the company of their influence. Then, with the cold precision of a surgeon, I went after their personal assets. The trust was dissolved. Every penny they had spent from it, on Eleanor's emeralds, Julian's cars, Alastair's failed ventures, was considered misappropriated and subject to clawback. The penthouse? Mine again. Eleanor's entire jewelry collection? Bought with company money? Seized by court order. Alastair's prized classic car collection? Repossessed from his climate-controlled garage. Julian's ill-gotten sports cars? Auctioned off to pay his legal fees. I became their primary creditor. I pursued every single debt they owed with the full terrifying force of the law. I owned their debt, and I called it all in. It was a rainy Tuesday, much like the day Nathaniel had died, when the final act of my revenge played out. The sky was a bruised purple, and a cold, relentless drizzle fell over Connecticut. I stood across the street, under a large black umbrella, watching. The Sterling family's last remaining asset, the sprawling mock Tudor Connecticut mansion Alastair had bought with embezzled funds, the symbol of their newfound old money status, was being foreclosed on. The bailiffs were at the door, overseeing the final removal of their belongings into a small rented moving truck. I walked across the slick street, my heels clicking a steady, deliberate rhythm on the wet pavement. The rain masked the tears on my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of catharsis, of release, the final draining of the poison they had injected into my life. Alistair, Eleanor, and Julian were huddled on the grand porch, surrounded by a pathetic cluster of suitcases and a few cardboard boxes. They looked old, shrunken, and utterly broken. The arrogance, the entitlement, the cold superiority, it was all gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed shock and the grubby patina of poverty. They saw me approaching. Eleanor let out a small, wounded animal sound and clutched at Alistair's arm. "You!" Alistair spat, his voice ragged and thin, stripped of all its former authority. "You vicious, vindictive bitch. You've taken everything. Everything we had." "No, Alistair," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the patter of the rain. It was the voice of a CEO, of a victor. "I've just taken back what you stole. And I've collected the interest on the debt of betrayal you incurred." "How could you?" Eleanor wailed, her face a streaked mess of tears and running mascara, her expensive dye job showing dark roots. "We're your family. We took you in." I laughed, a short, sharp, bitter sound that held no humor. "You were never my family. You were the poison in my husband's life. You were the cancer that sought to consume everything he loved. And now," I said, my gaze sweeping over all three of them, "the antidote has been administered. The patient is cured." Julian just stared at the ground, a broken man, his shoulders slumped. He had nothing left to say. His plea deal had stripped him of even the dignity of defiance. "Where will we go?" Alistair whispered, the question slipping out before he could stop it. It was the plea of a lost child, the final, utter surrender of the patriarch. It was the sound of a man with nothing. I looked at them, these three people who had shown me such exquisite cruelty, who had thought a widow's grief made her weak, and I delivered my final, perfectly crafted blow. I reached into the inside pocket of my tailored coat and pulled out 3 crisp white envelopes. I handed one to each of them. Confused, trembling, they opened them. Inside each was a single $50 bill and a voucher for a 1-week stay at a homeless shelter on the outskirts of the city, a place known for its strict rules and grim conditions. "Consider it a stipend," I said, my voice as cold as the rain soaking through their clothes. "For your welfare. It's more than generous, given you came into my life with nothing but greed, malice, and a profound talent for betrayal." The look on their faces in that moment, a grotesque mosaic of horror, understanding, and utter absolute devastation, was worth every second of the hell they had put me through. It was the masterpiece I had been working towards, the final satisfying click of a lock. I turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the rain, homeless and penniless, clutching their pathetic envelopes. I didn't look back. I got into the waiting town car, and as the driver pulled away, I finally allowed myself to breathe, a deep, cleansing breath that felt like the first one I'd taken since Nathaniel died. I rebuilt Aetherius in Nathaniel's image, with Ben Croft at the helm. It's more successful and more ethically run than ever. We've dedicated a massive foundation in Nate's name to funding cutting-edge cancer research, so that other families might be spared our nightmare. The penthouse is my home again, filled with his memory and our things, but now it's a place of peace and power, not pain. As for the Sterlings, the last I heard, they drifted apart, the bonds of their conspiracy not strong enough to withstand the weight of their failure. Alistair works as a night watchman for a warehouse in New Jersey. Eleanor, her hands ruined by bleach and cleaning solutions, works for a maid service, scrubbing the toilets of the kind of people she once looked down upon. Julian is serving a 2-year sentence in a minimum security prison for fraud. They learned the hardest lesson of all. That when you push a woman who has lost everything, she has nothing left to do but become everything you fear, and take it all back. They tried to bury me. They didn't realize I was a seed. And from the bitter ashes of their betrayal, I grew into something stronger, fiercer, and utterly, completely free. My name is Isabella Sterling. And this was my widow's revenge.
Thanks for watching. Click the subscribe button below to subscribe to our channel. Beyond All Stories.